Before we begin, find a quiet place, settle in, and let your mind walk into the dark woods with me. This is a story you don't just hear, you feel it. Close your eyes, if you dare, and listen carefully. They were 27 teenagers, full of life, headed for one last adventure before adulthood. Then they vanished without a trace. No calls, no bodies, just silence. For 22 years. The story of the class of '99 was nothing more than a terrifying urban legend, a cautionary tale, whispered around campfires, told in hushed voices on late-night drives, used to scare freshmen and children who stayed out too late. That is, until a hiker stumbled upon a rusted school bus in the woods, swallowed by moss, filled with moldy yearbooks and something else. Something no one was prepared for. June 3, 2021. Oregon's Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest. The air was cool and damp, the kind of cold that seeped through jackets and into bone. A seasoned hiker named Travis Milner, an off-duty firefighter from Medford, moved carefully along an unmarked stretch of terrain. Had walked these forests for years, but today had wandered off the usual trail, drawn deeper by the promise of quiet and solitude. Ferns brushed his legs. The earth was soft beneath his boots, littered with pine needles and rotting leaves. Above him, the thick canopy of fir and cedar turned the midday light into a muted green gloom. For hours, it was nothing but trees, birds, and the distant whisper of the wind. Then he saw it. At first, it was just a flash of color, a strange, muted yellow peeking through the dark tangle of trunks and undergrowth. He paused, squinting through the branches. There were no ranger outposts here. No equipment storage, no cabins. Nothing. Curiosity tugged at him. He pushed forward, swatting at branches, forcing his way through until the shape revealed itself. A structure, box-like, rotting, half consumed by the forest. Metal windows, streaked with rust and mildew. A roof caved inward in places. Tires, cracked and deflated, sunk deep into the earth as if the ground had slowly tried to swallow them whole. It was a school bus, or what was left of one. The paint that had once been bright yellow was now a peeling, sickly shade, mottled with lichen and moss. Vines climbed through the broken windows, twisting through the seats. A branch had cracked one of the side panels years ago and grown through it, fusing tree and machine into one strange, unnatural shape. Travis' heartbeat picked up. The number on the side was nearly gone, barely visible beneath grime and rust. But if he wiped away the moss with his glove, he could just make it out. Bus 57. The door was jammed, swollen from decades of rain and rot. When he grabbed the handle and pulled, it resisted him, groaning like something alive. He braced one foot against the step, yanked hard, and the door finally gave way with a shuddering screech. Stale air poured out. It smelled like mold, dust, and something else. Something older. Something wrong. He lifted his sleeve to cover his nose and stepped inside. It looked like time had simply stopped and then been left to rot. Dusty backpacks lay still strapped to torn vinyl seats. Water-warped notebooks and crumbled binders were scattered in the aisle. A cassette player, long dead, lay on the floor, its plastic warped and discolored by moisture. Faded Polaroid photos were stuck to the floor and seat backs, glued in place by a thin sheen of mold. Faces blurred by decay stared back at him with half-erased smiles. Pages from a yearbook clung together in clumps, the ink smeared into unreadable shadows. Here and there, a name could still be seen. A date. A scrawled signature in a blue pen, forever bled into sepia swirls. Bus 57 was not empty. As Travis' eyes adjusted to the dimness, he noticed that the back of the bus looked different. More cluttered. Piles of clothing were heaped across the rear bench seat, long rotted and fused into dark, unrecognizable masses. Among them glinted the dull white of bone. At first, he thought it was an animal, a deer, maybe a bear that had crawled in here to die. But then he saw the curve of it, the shape, the teeth. A human jawbone. Unmistakable. Something in Travis' mind recoiled. His vision tunneled for a moment as the reality of what he was seeing sank in. This was not just an abandoned bus. This was a grave. He stumbled backward, almost tripping over a broken seat frame. His training took over. He fumbled for his phone with trembling hands, turned, and stepped back out into the filtered forest light. Within hours, the quiet clearing deep in the rogue River Siskiyou National Forest would no longer be quiet. By that evening, the bus was surrounded by yellow tape, floodlights, and the low murmur of voices. Investigators, forensic teams, anthropologists, state police, and later, reporters, all drawn to this rusting skeleton of metal and glass. When the first officers stepped inside and saw the backpacks, the jackets, the caps, the mold-stained yearbook pages, and scattered school relics, one case came to mind immediately. Forest Grove High School, class of 1999. The disappearance that had haunted Oregon for more than 2 decades. As they catalogued the bus number, the items inside, the location deep in a part of the forest where no roads existed wide enough for a vehicle of that size to travel without leaving significant damage, the impossible truth began to take shape. This wasn't just some abandoned vehicle. This wasn't vandalism or a forgotten field trip. This was the ghost of a missing generation. And the deeper they looked, the more impossible it became. There were no records of Bus 57 being rented or assigned for any trip into that stretch of wilderness. No local company, no district log, no paper trail that matched. No trail cameras had picked up footage of a school bus entering the forest from any direction. No tire ruts cutting through soil. No broken saplings or crushed brush leading to the clearing. The bus hadn't just driven here. It had been hidden here, placed inside. The personal belongings told their own story. They found items belonging to nearly every missing student: wallets, letters, jewelry, old tube lipsticks, a boy's varsity jacket, a class ring stuck between 2 seats, yearbook pages with scribbled "Have a great summer" messages and hearts dotted over is. Some things looked untouched, almost eerily preserved. Others were arranged, not dropped, not scattered, arranged. A necklace carefully coiled and set in the middle of an aisle. A stack of Polaroids fanned out on a seat back, pinned there with a rusted nail. 3 backpacks lined up perfectly at the front, zippers facing outward, as if waiting to be claimed. It looked less like a forgotten scene and more like a message, or a ritual. What happened on that bus was not an accident, and what the forest had kept hidden for over 2 decades was more than a tragedy. It was a secret no one was meant to find. 22 years earlier, the story began the way many stories do, with the school hallway and the illusion that everything was still on track. The halls of Forest Grove High School buzzed with the electric energy of seniors on the brink of freedom. Locker doors slammed, laughter echoed, sneakers squeaked on the linoleum floors. Teachers wore the weary smiles of people counting down the days, clutching stacks of graded finals and attendance sheets. It was May 1999, and for the seniors, life felt both endless and about to change forever. Among the sea of navy caps and gowns being prepped for rehearsal, 26 students stood out, not because they were extraordinary, but because they were close. A tight-knit group that had grown together through shared classrooms, heartbreaks, early friendships, awkward dances, crammed group projects, and Friday night games under the lights. They weren't a clique. Not exactly. Just a circle of lives that had, over the years, wound themselves together. Lacey Monroe walked the hallway with effortless grace, a folder clutched neatly to her chest. Teachers nodded to her as she passed, some with pride, some with a subtle sympathy she never quite understood. Lacey was everything her parents had hoped for: valedictorian, student council president, debate champion, future Ivy Leaguer. Her father, Mayor Thomas Monroe never missed a chance to mention her achievements whenever he spoke at city events. "Our Lacey," he would say into microphones and cameras alike, "is proof that Forest Grove's future is bright." People would clap, and Lacey would smile on cue. But those who knew her more closely could see the pressure behind that polished smile. They saw the dark circles under her eyes from late-night study sessions. They heard the slight tremor in her voice when grades came back at anything less than perfect. They noticed the panic attacks she thought she'd hidden in bathroom stalls, leaning against cool tile while trying to breathe through the dizziness. Doing everything right had its own price. Down the hall, Jared Fields darted into the room, camera in hand, narrating his own mockumentary of high school life. He swung the old camcorder toward his friends, zooming dramatically into faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," he whispered into the microphone, "we are currently in the wild habitat of the American suburban teenager. Just days before release into the terrifying ecosystem known as the real world." "Get out of my face, Jared," someone laughed, swatting at the camera. He grinned, pivoted, kept filming. Jared was the class clown, but not the empty kind. Bold, relentless, occasionally obnoxious. Sure, but behind the jokes his eyes carried a sharpness few noticed. He watched everything. He listened. He saw the cracks other people pretended weren't there. He planned to turn the upcoming graduation camping trip into his final project. A time capsule of their last week together. "It's going to be my Blair Witch, but funnier," he told Tyrese one afternoon, slamming his lunch tray down at their table. "We'll watch it at our 10-year reunion and cringe at our haircuts." Tyrese Hall just shook his head, laughing. Sitting down next to him, his broad shoulders filled the bench. He towered over most of his classmates, and for years, his life had been defined by helmets and shoulder pads and the roar of Friday night crowds. Now the shoulder pads were gone, replaced with the weight of something heavier. Expectations. Tyrese had a full-ride football scholarship to Oregon State. Coaches expected big things. Classmates expected to see him on TV. His mom, who worked double shifts and never missed a game, expected her son's talent to finally give them a way out. But with every scholarship letter, every handshake from a recruiter, the same quiet fear stalked him at night. What if I fail? What if the best years of my life already happened under those stadium lights? Between them all, usually unnoticed, moved Emily Tran. If you weren't paying attention, you'd miss her. Not because she was small or forgettable, but because she didn't demand space the way others did. Emily's presence announced itself only through the soft scrape of pencil on paper. Her sketchbook never left her side. Its pages were filled with portraits of classmates who never knew they'd been drawn, captured in moments they thought no one saw, biting nails in study hall, staring out the window in math, laughing into a locker door. Lately, though, her sketchbook held fewer faces and more trees. Deep forests, twisted trunks, shadows that stretched to long clearings with strange symbols etched into the soil. She claimed the scenes came to her in dreams. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when she did, her words lingered. People trusted Emily without knowing exactly why. Maybe it was her calm. Maybe her quiet made her seem safe. That would matter later. The final bell rang on a Friday afternoon, and the school erupted. Someone in the parking lot blasted Green Day's Good Riddance Time of Your Life. From their car stereo, windows down, seniors singing along off-key. Teachers handed out final permission slips for the trip, warm manila envelopes crinkling in sweaty, excited hands. Conversations buzzed with talk of tents, playlists, smuggled beer, and how far away from any parental eye they were finally going to be. The trip had been planned for months. 27 seniors heading into the Rogue River wilderness for a weekend of hiking, campfires, and the feeling of being suspended in that strange space between who they had been and who they were supposed to become. The destination was a remote campground nestled deep inside that vast stretch of forest. Isolated, scenic, far away from parents, curfews, and rules. June 5, 1999. It was supposed to be a celebration. They left that Saturday morning under a pale blue sky as neighbors peered out from porches, and parents stood in clusters with coffee cups and camcorders. A yellow school bus idled at the curb, its engine rumbling, the scent of diesel filling the air. Backpacks stuffed with snacks, sleeping bags lashed together with bungee cords, rolled tents, cooler lids taped down. Someone had brought a guitar. Someone else had brought fireworks, tucked strategically under duffel bags. The driver that morning was a substitute Mr. Harold Griggs, filling in for the usual driver who had called out sick late the night before. Griggs was in his late 50s, grey-haired, quiet. He nodded politely at parents, checked his manifest twice, and held the clipboard like a shield. Everyone buckled. He called out once the kids had piled in, voices echoing off metal and glass. "No," came the chorus. He sighed. "Figure it out on the road," he muttered, shifting the bus into gear. Several parents lifted their camcorders and recorded those last moments. Grainy video that, for years, would be replayed and paused and studied until the tapes wore thin. A group photo was taken right before boarding 27 teenagers, two chaperones, and a substitute driver, all clustered together under the morning light, squinting and smiling. That was the last confirmed image anyone would ever see of them alive. The bus pulled away from the curb to cheers and honking horns. Hands waved from the windows. A couple of students pressed their palms to the glass and mouthed freedom as they turned the corner. Hours later, the bus was supposed to check in at the campground. A quick call from the payphone by the ranger station. A note in the visitor log. A simple sign of arrival. That call never came. Around 6:41 p.m., one of the parents, Elsie McClure, received a voicemail on her landline. When she played it, she heard her daughter Rachel's voice, strained, crackling through static. "Hey, Mum," Rachel said, sounding breathless, like she was talking while walking. "We're almost there, I think. Jared won't turn off the camera." "Tell Dad," in the background, muffled laughter. Someone shouting, "Turn that off." A burst of static. A pause. Then nothing. No goodbye. No click of a hang-up. Just soft, hissing static, as if the phone had been left open to the sound of the forest. Elsie replayed it 3 times, frowning, then shrugged it off. Reception out there was bad. Maybe they lost signal. Maybe Rachel forgot to hang up. When the bus failed to check in at the campground that night, it was first assumed they'd been delayed. The weather had turned foggy. The roads that wound toward the forest were narrow and barely paved in places, lined with dense trees and steep drop-offs. Everyone told themselves the same thing. They'd show up late, tired, laughing about how they got lost. By midnight, most of the parents had stopped sleeping. By sunrise, they had stopped pretending everything was fine. Calls to the chaperones' cell phones went straight to voicemail or rang endlessly. The campground host confirmed that no yellow school bus had arrived. No group of teenagers had checked in. No tents had gone up on sites that were booked in their name. By Sunday morning, panic had rooted itself in a small town. Search and rescue teams were dispatched. Helicopters churned the air above the trees, scanning the region for any sign of a wreck. Dogs were brought in to track scent along every road, every turnout, every potential side path. They found nothing. No tire tracks veering off the road. No skid marks. No broken guardrails. No scattered debris. No footprints. No dropped backpack along a trail. It was as if the bus had simply vanished between here and there. On the third day, search teams widened their perimeter. They combed logging roads, old fire breaks, dry creek beds. Volunteers showed up with maps and flashlights. walking shoulder to shoulder through clearings and ravines. 1 week later, a local fisherman found something strange near a riverbed 15 miles from the main road. Half buried in the mud was a disposable camera, its yellow casing cracked and water damaged. He turned it over in his hands, wiped off the muck, and saw faint marker scribbles on the side. A name washed almost away. He turned it in. When investigators opened the camera, hoping for answers or at least a glimpse of the missing teen's last hours, they found the inside empty. The film had been removed. 10 days after that, another mystery surfaced. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, whose son Trevor had been one of the missing seniors, received a letter in the mail. There was no return address, no postmark, just an envelope slipped into their box sometime in the night. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. On it, written in shaky handwriting, were 5 words. "We made it. Please stop looking." At first, it gave them hope. Trevor's mother clung to the note so tightly the corners tore. Maybe he was alive. Maybe they had run away. Maybe they'd joined some commune and were too afraid to come back. Handwriting experts reviewed it. They compared it to Trevor's essays, birthday cards, detention slips. The curves of the letters were close, but off. The spacing was strange. The pressure uneven. It looked almost like Trevor's writing, but not quite. The final verdict: likely forged, possibly traced, not conclusive, not proof. Still, the note ignited rumors. Some said the kids had staged their disappearance, that the bus was abandoned somewhere, and they'd vanished into some fringe community, reinventing themselves. Others whispered about cults or strange rituals in the woods. A few insisted the students were still alive out there, hiding, not wanting to be found. The facts, though, refused to bend. There was no trace of the bus, no trace of the driver, no trace of the 27 students. No witness ever came forward. No body, no crash site, no belongings. After 2 months, under growing pressure and with no leads, the case was officially moved from active investigation to cold status, labeled an unsolved missing persons event. The file was never closed, but in the eyes of the state, the trail had ended. The parents never accepted that. Some walked those forest trails every year on the anniversary, leaving flowers at trailheads and along riverbanks. Others posted photos on missing persons boards and early internet forums, desperately hoping someone somewhere would recognize a face. And one father, Robert Vasquez, whose son Miguel had been on that bus, kept a journal. He wrote down every theory he heard, every strange tip, every phone call from people claiming to have seen someone from the class in a distant town. On one page, he wrote a single line and circled it twice. "I don't think they drove off the road. I don't think it was an accident. I think something took them. Something that didn't want them found." He never explained what he meant by that, and no one ever proved him wrong. 21 years passed. Forest Grove High School moved on, as schools do, because they must. New freshmen filled the hallways each fall. New posters went up for prom themes and club meetings. New faces lined up for yearbook photos and class pictures. But the shadow never left. Near the main entrance, just past the trophy case, a bronze plaque was mounted on the wall. It bore the names of 27 students etched in careful, even letters beneath the words. Gone, but never forgotten class of 1999. Every June, the school held a memorial. 27 candles were lit by teachers and student council members. Stories were told. Some faculty retired early, unable to walk the same halls, haunted by faces that never aged in their memories. Others stayed, refusing to abandon those ghosts. Across town, time had moved even slower. Bedrooms were left untouched, posters peeling on the walls, participation ribbons and track medals gathering dust. Shelves still held dog-eared paperbacks and CD towers filled with albums no one listened to anymore. Beds were made the same way they had been the last morning before the trip. The scent of cologne perfume or cheap body spray clung faintly to the air like a memory wallpapered onto the room. Some parents clung to hope like oxygen, refusing to say was instead of is. Others folded inwards, grief settling not as a scream, but as a quiet, heavy weight that never lifted. Mr. Delaney, whose son Matthew had been the class salutatorian, spent most of his days at the local library. He'd pull out Matthew's final essay, his college entrance piece, and read it over and over at the same table, the pages soft from his hands. Mrs. Santos, whose daughter Nina had been a star on the varsity soccer team, watered the same garden Nina had planted weeks before the trip. She never cut a single flower. The garden grew wild and overfull, but she couldn't bring herself to disturb it. And no one held on tighter than Lacey's mother, Irene Monroe, while others eventually held memorials or placed plaques at cemeteries. Irene refused to sign any legal declaration of death. She refused to put a stone in the ground. Lacey's toothbrush remained in the cup by the sink. Her voicemail greeting stayed active for years, the mailbox long since full. Irene washed and made Lacey's bed every morning, smoothing the comforter as if preparing it for her return that night. "She's not gone," Irene would say whenever anyone suggested otherwise. "I don't know where she is, but she's out there. I feel it." Neighbors called it denial. Her family called it grief. The truth was both. June 3, 2021. Nearly noon. Deep inside the rogue River Siskiyou National Forest, years after the searches had stopped, Travis pushed open the door of Bus 57 and discovered the tomb that would tear open 2 decades of silence. Once law enforcement arrived, Travis stepped back and watched as the professionals took over. Cameras flashed. Evidence markers lined the aisle. The low hum of radios and clipped voices filled the clearing, disrupting the strange, still peace the bus had enjoyed for 22 years. They catalogued everything. The rotting, but still recognizable sports jackets. A pair of mold-flecked graduation caps lying under a seat. A jacket with the Forest Grove High School crest hanging limply over the edge of a torn cushion. The bus had become a mausoleum, a capsule of a night that never ended. At the very back, beneath collapsed luggage racks and decaying duffel bags, they found bones. Not one set. Several. Time and weather had done their work. Some were fully skeletonized, a lattice of pale shapes tangled in what remained of clothing. Others were fragmented, scattered across the floor, nestled in piles of damp clothing and dirt. Later, they would confirm multiple human remains. 17 individuals in and around the back half of the bus. As the forensic team worked, an officer kneeling near the front noticed something wedged under the driver's seat, almost hidden by damp trash and disintegrating paper. He tugged on it gently and pulled out a manila folder, waterlogged but surprisingly intact. Inside were sketches, charcoal and pencil drawings, some smeared, some preserved. At the bottom corner of nearly every page was a small signature. Emily T. Emily Tran, one of the missing seniors. Her body was not among the remains on the bus. The drawings were unsettling in a way that went beyond their content. They were precise, detailed. The strokes were dark where they needed to be, lighter where shadows softened. Whoever had made them had seen these things up close. One sketch showed a ring of figures standing in a forest clearing, surrounding a fire. Their faces were hidden beneath crude masks. Around them, tall trunks of trees loomed, their branches forming strange shapes overhead. Another drawing showed a cluster of faces behind those masks' eyes, like empty hollows. Features blurred into anonymity. A third sketch, darker and more frenzied than the others, depicted blood dripping from tree branches, forming a circle on the forest floor. Symbols were scrawled in the background, twisted characters that resembled no known language. A ring of stones encircled the scene, each marked with a symbol of its own. Some pages looked as if they'd been ripped from a journal. There were partial sentences along the margins, written in tiny letters. They said the forest is listening. We're not going home. The masks looked different at night. The final sketch in the folder stopped the investigators cold. It showed a school bus, drawn from slightly above, as if someone were looking down at it from among the trees. The bus was surrounded by a ring of tall, faceless silhouettes, their bodies obscured by cloaks or robes. In the front window, behind the steering wheel, was a mask. No face behind it, just the mask itself, staring out. The more they examined, the stranger it became. Dental records and DNA testing would soon identify the remains of the people who disappeared that June day in 1999. 26 students and two teachers on the manifest, plus one substitute driver. 17 bodies were accounted for in or near the bus. 9 students were still missing. So was the app history teacher, Mr. Carl Muse. So was the chaperone, Ms. Janine Crawford. And so was Emily Tran. The discovery shattered the theory that the class had simply run away, or that the bus had gone off a cliff unnoticed. The bus position made that impossible. It was too deep in the forest, with no visible path wide enough for it to have traveled. No crash damage on nearby trees. No sign of impact. Someone had brought the bus here. Someone had hidden it. Why were there only 17 bodies? Where were the others? And why was the quiet girl with the sketchbook drawing scenes of rituals long before the bus was ever found? The case was reopened not as a missing persons investigation, but as a probable mass crime scene. News vans camped outside the small town. Old footage and interviews were dug out of archives. The sketches were leaked to the press, first as grainy stills, then in high-resolution scans that flooded the internet. A new theory took hold, one far darker than before. Maybe this wasn't just a disappearance. Maybe it was a cult. Days after the world learned that the ghost of Bus 57 had been found, the Bend police station was suffocating under the weight of cameras, reporters, and constant ringing phones. Investigators were working double shifts. Old detectives brought out of retirement sat in conference rooms going through dusty boxes. Whiteboards were crowded with names, dates, maps of the forest, arrows connecting questions that had never been answered. June 10, 2021, dawned gray and cool. The fluorescent lights in the station hummed as they always did. Officers shuffled paperwork. Coffee dripped in a pot that had seen better years. Then the door opened. At first, no one paid attention. People came and went, concerned citizens, tipsters, the occasional crank who claimed to be psychic or to have seen something in a dream. But the room fell gradually silent as the man stepped forward. He was thin, not the kind of thin that comes from a diet, but the kind carved by neglect. His clothes hung off his frame: an old, tattered jacket, a shirt with frayed cuffs, jeans that had seen years of wear. His hair was long and disheveled, hanging in tangled strands over his forehead. His face was unshaven, cheeks hollow, eyes sunken. Those eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal's. He approached the front desk slowly, each step deliberate, as if he were forcing himself to move. The officer at the desk, still half absorbed in a report, glanced up. "Can I help you?" The man leaned forward, his voice barely more than a whisper. "My name is Jared Fields," he said, "from the class of 1999. The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. For a moment, no one moved. Conversations died mid-sentence. Officers exchanged startled, confused glances. A half-finished cup of coffee hovered in someone's hand. The name was familiar, very familiar. It had appeared in every article, every archived news report, every list of the missing. Jared Fields, one of the seniors on the bus, presumed dead for 22 years. Sergeant Emily Wells was the first to react. She stepped forward slowly from her desk, studying his face. The lines were different. Time had carved its signature across his features. But beneath the wear, beneath the beard and hair and exhaustion, there was something she recognized from old photos. "Mr. Fields," she said carefully, keeping her voice steady. "We're going to need identification." He didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't reach for anything. Instead, his eyes flickered toward the door, then to the ceiling corners, as if expecting something to be watching from every angle. "I was never supposed to come back," he murmured. "They're still watching." A chill ran up Sergeant Wells' spine. "Who's watching, Jared?" she asked, soft, cautious. He shook his head. His hands, she noticed, were trembling. Dirt was embedded in his fingernails, as if he had been living outdoors for a long time. "I don't know," he said, though it sounded more like he didn't want to say. "I was never supposed to come back. None of us were." He sounded less like a man who had simply survived an accident, and more like someone who had been forced to survive something that had rearranged his entire understanding of the world. Before Wells could ask another question, a forensic technician hurried into the room with a folder. "Sergeant, we have..." His voice trailed off as he registered the tension in the room and the man standing at the counter. It didn't take long to get his fingerprints. The man didn't resist when asked. He just watched the process with empty eyes, as if going through the motions of something inevitable. They rushed the prints and a quick DNA swab. When the results came back, Sergeant Wells read them twice. Fingerprint match. Fields, Jared Anthony. DNA match. Consistent with samples collected from the Fields household in 1999. She looked up. "Jared," she said quietly, "it's you. The tests confirm it. It really is you." For the first time since entering the station, Jared's expression shifted. His eyes widened not with relief, but something closer to dread. "I told you," he whispered again. "I told you I wasn't supposed to come back. I shouldn't have come back." He looked around the room, at the uniforms, the badges, the posters on the wall asking for information about Bus 57. It was like he'd walked into the aftermath of a nightmare he'd once escaped. "Mr. Fields," Wells tried again, "we need to know where you've been. We need to know what happened to your classmates, to the others on the bus." His lips parted. For a second, it seemed like he'd speak, but then his jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists at his sides. He shook his head. "I can't," he said. "Not yet. They're still out there. They won't stop watching until it's all over." Before anyone could stop him, he turned and walked quickly toward the door. "Jared, wait." Wells moved after him, but he was already outside, sunlight washing over his thin frame as he stepped into the parking lot. By the time officers made it outside, he was gone, swallowed up by the city streets. They had expected a witness who would give them closure, a survivor ready to tell the story they'd been building towards for 2 decades. Instead, they had a man who seemed as haunted as the forest itself. He didn't stay gone for long. Within days, after a short, chaotic period of media frenzy and speculation, Jared was brought back, in this time under protection, under supervision, with lawyers and psychologists and federal agents joining the local investigation. The interview room was softly lit, no harsh overhead glare, just a table, 2 chairs, and a glass of water. Cameras recorded every word. Jared sat hunched forward, his fingers laced together tightly, knuckles white. The haunted look in his eyes hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened. For 2 hours, they went through the basics. Where he claimed to have been, how he had left the forest, how he had managed to live under the radar for so long. His answers were fragmented, cautious, as if he were walking through a minefield of memories. But eventually, inevitably, they reached the moment that mattered most. "The day the bus broke down," Jared said, his voice soft but steady now, "was the day everything changed." He took a shaky breath and stared past the investigators, eyes unfocusing as he slid back into the memory. "We were miles from the main road," he began, past where the ranger map showed actual routes. I remember trees pressing in close to the windows, branches scraping the sides. We were joking, singing, throwing chips at each other. Jared the cameraman, making everyone wave at the lens, right? It felt normal. It felt stupid and normal. The engine sputtered. It started as this weird little hiccup, he said. Like the bus coughed. Griggs Mr. Griggs looked down at the dash, frowning. The light changed. I remember the way the kids in the front row went quiet. Then it happened again. Harder. He made a small motion with his hand, mimicking the jerk of the vehicle. And then it just died. The whole engine, the hum we'd been hearing all day, cut out, and suddenly it was just us and the sound of the forest. No music, no road noise, just wind and birds and that weird silence. Griggs tried to restart it. Once, twice, 5 times. Nothing. Some kids joked about it. Others rolled their eyes. A few looked scared. Lacey had come down the aisle, standing next to his seat, asking calmly if they were going to be late, if there was a plan. Well, figure it out, Griggs had muttered. But there was no cell signal. Not for the teachers, not for any of the students. The map they had was a printed one. The road they were on was marked faintly, an old logging road that, according to the chaperones, would connect them to a more direct route to the campground. Except it didn't. Or not in the way they thought. They waited. Minutes turned into an hour. The forest pressed in louder, like it knew they were stuck. That's when they found us, Jared said. At first, it was just movement in the trees. Shadows that weren't wind. Figures stepping between trunks, emerging from places they'd thought were empty. They wore grey robes, the cloth stained and dulled by dirt and weather. Hoods covered their hair. Some faces were visible. Some weren't. There were more than a dozen of them. They called themselves the Chosen, Jared said. At least, that's what they told us. They claimed to be from an off-grid sanctuary, a place of peace and simplicity, a place to escape the chaos of the world. They spoke calmly, almost gently, explaining that they lived deep in the forest, growing their own food, making their own clothes, worshipping in their own way. They told the stranded group that the world outside was falling apart, that they had left in time, that storms were coming, wars, collapses. They said they could help. At first, we thought it was some kind of echo cult, Jared admitted. A bunch of weird hippies who had decided electricity was evil. But the bus was dead. We had no way to call out. And we were miles off any main road. The teachers didn't know what else to do. The Chosen offered food, water, and shelter for the night. They'd send someone to hike back to a ranger station, they said. They'd let the authorities know. Help would come. It felt wrong, but it also felt like their only option. We followed them, Jared said. We didn't exactly have a choice. They walked for hours through dense forest, away from the bus, away from the road. The path the Chosen led them along was not visible to the untrained eye, a barely discernible trail, weaving between trees, over rocks, across narrow streams. As the daylight faded, they saw it. A cluster of cabins and structures, rough but solid, built from timber and stone in a clearing that did not appear on any map. A large communal lodge at the center. Several smaller cabins and longhouses extending outward. A fenced garden. Smoke rising from chimneys into the cold evening sky. It felt quiet, Jared remembered. Too quiet. Like a movie set right before they yell action. They were given food, stew thick with root vegetables, and something that tasted like meat but couldn't be easily named. Fresh bread. Water from a well. They were allowed to sleep in one of the larger bunkhouse-style cabins. The first night, everyone tried to treat it as a weird adventure. The second day, questions started. No one left to go to a ranger station. Not that anyone saw. When the teachers asked when they should expect help, the answers were vague: soon. When it's safe. When the time is right. The The chosen encouraged them to rest, to let go of their anxieties about going home. They spoke of the outside world as if it were a sick animal they'd escaped. They told us the world out there was crumbling, Jared said. That the forest was the only safe place left. They kept saying we were lucky. We were chosen to be there. It didn't take long for certain rules to emerge. They weren't supposed to talk about where they came from. They were discouraged, then forbidden from talking about their families, their town, their school. Any conversation about before was gently redirected, then sharply shut down. They called it reconditioning, Jared said. They said we had to cleanse ourselves of our old lives, of our attachments. They controlled when the students slept and when they woke. Intricate sleep schedules were drawn up. No one was allowed to sleep more than certain hours at a time without supervision. There were reflection periods, when they were expected to sit in circles and listen to sermons from the group's leaders. The leaders did not call themselves pastors. They called themselves guides. The food began to taste different. Heavy, thick, bland, but with an aftertaste that lingered on the tongue. Too many kids complained of feeling foggy, sluggish, like their thoughts were moving through mud. I think they were drugging us, Jared said. I can't prove it, but it felt like that. Like they were trying to dull sharp edges, make us easier to shape. Some of the students began to have vivid dreams. Not the normal kind. Nightmares that felt more like memories. Waking in the middle of the night with the sensation of hands on their shoulders, of being watched, of standing in the forest in the dark while something unseen circled them. Emily's dreams were the worst. She was drawing all the time, Jared said. At first, it was the cabins, the garden, some of the people. Then it started to change. She'd wake up shaking and go straight for her notebook. She said the forest was showing her things. That sounds crazy, I know. But the things she drew he trailed off. Masks. Ritual circles, figures around a fire. The same images later found in that moldy folder under the driver's seat. Some of the kids resisted sooner than others. Tyrese argued with one of the guides when they tried to force him to participate in a cleansing ritual. Lacey kept asking when they would be taken back to the bus, when someone would drive them out. Rachel begged to call her mom. They were ignored, then gently isolated. Then watched. The more they resisted, the tighter the commune's grip became. Nights grew colder. The sermons became darker. The guides spoke of sacrifices not in a symbolic sense, but as something necessary. They said the forest had to be appeased, that the world outside had demanded everything from them and given nothing back. And now it was time to give themselves fully to a new order. I saw a few kids try to escape, Jared said quietly. They waited until one of the guards fell asleep by the fire. They ran into the trees. I heard branches breaking. I heard them shouting each other's names. He swallowed hard. Then I heard the screams. They didn't come back. After that, the message was clear. Those who fought, those who refused to let go of who they had been, were taken to the forest. They said the forest would decide, Jared recalled. But we knew what that meant. We didn't see them again. Not in camp. Not anywhere. The word sacrifice stopped being metaphor. The students were split into groups. Some were assigned to work in the gardens, others in the kitchens. Some were given tasks like weaving or chopping wood. Every action was observed, noted. Those who complied were rewarded with slightly better food, more sleep, a kind word. Those who hesitated were punished with isolation, hunger, or worse. They told us they were the chosen ones, Jared continued. They said the world had ended outside the woods, that there were no cities anymore, no schools, no families, just this, just them, and that we'd been picked to start something new. It wasn't a choice, it was a prison with no bars. The forest itself was the cage, and those who didn't accept it, he said, his voice almost breaking, were sacrificed. The investigators listened in frozen silence. What about the bus? One of them asked. How did it get where we found it? Jared stared down at his hands. They used it, he said. Later. As part of something. Part of a ritual. They towed it deeper into the woods with old trucks. It took days. They said it was our ark, our tomb, our old world carcass. They made us watch as they decorated it. Put our stuff in it like props. He swallowed again, eyes shining. They took some of us there, he said. Not all. Some who had failed the cleansing. Others who were chosen for something worse. The ones who are on that bus, they didn't just die. They were offered to whatever they believed was listening in those trees. He looked up finally, meeting the eyes of the people across the table. I wasn't supposed to see that, he whispered. I only saw pieces. Enough. By 2006, Jared had reached his breaking point. I couldn't do it anymore, he said. The pretending, the listening. I knew if I stayed, I'd end up like the others. Offered up and forgotten. He watched. He waited. He noticed which paths the guards took when they walked the perimeter. He paid attention to which nights the chosen held their rituals deep in the woods, when the camp's attention was drawn inward toward the fire circle. I ran, he said simply. One night when the chanting got loud and the drums started, I slipped out, stayed low, crawled half the time. The forest was dark, but it felt different, like it wanted me to move. He ran until his lungs burned, until branches tore at his clothes and face, until his legs gave out. He slept under trees. He drank from streams. He hid when he heard distant voices. It took him days to find a road, weeks to convince himself to flag down a car. He gave a fake name. He told a story about being lost on a hiking trip. No one asked too many questions. They just saw a skinny, terrified young man in tattered clothes and assumed he'd been careless. I thought, he admitted, that if I told anyone, they'd think I was insane. Or worse, that the chosen would find out. I knew they had people outside. Sympathizers. I'd seen them come and go. So he ran from more than just the forest. He drifted, moved from job to job, town to town, stayed off social media, used cash when he could, slept in shelters, cheap motels, occasionally behind locked church doors when he could talk someone into letting him stay. The nightmares followed him. So did the guilt. I thought I was the only one who got out, he said. I hoped stupidly that maybe some of the others had, too. But I didn't look. I was too afraid. I thought if I keep quiet long enough, maybe they'll forget me. They didn't. Years later, sitting on a grimy mattress in a rented room above a closed-down storefront, Jared saw a news alert on a television in a bar. A rusted bus discovered. Remains. Forest Grove High School. Class of 1999. I knew then, he said, voice barely audible. They hadn't forgotten. Not the forest. Not the chosen. They'd left that bus there for a reason. And now it was open. And if I didn't say anything, if I didn't tell what I knew, he trailed off, his shoulders sagging. I had to come back, he whispered. I had to tell someone the truth. When Jared's story became public because nothing that explosive could be contained for long, the reaction was immediate and violent. Some parents clung to his every word. They believed him because it gave shape to the horror they had carried for 22 years. To them, he was not just a witness, he was the only survivor of something unspeakable. Others rejected him outright. They could not, would not, connect the children they had loved with the nightmare he described. They refused to accept that their sons and daughters had been drugged, reconditioned, sacrificed in rituals among the trees. For them, it was easier to believe he was lying, delusional, or complicit. Talk shows dissected his story. Experts weighed in on cult behavior, forest geography, mass psychosis. Some called Jared a hero. Others called him a fraud. Internet forums exploded with theories, connecting the chosen to other fringe communities, to long-forgotten missing persons cases, to paramilitary groups hiding off-grid. The word militia started appearing in articles, hinted whispers in investigative reports. According to some leaked documents, there were signs that the Chosen had stockpiled weapons, that they saw themselves not just as a religious group, but as a kind of forest militia, preparing for an imagined collapse of the government. If that was true, it meant they were dangerous beyond their rituals. It also meant they might still be out there. The divide in the community deepened. In grocery store lines, in church pews, at town hall meetings, people argued about Jared, about the bus, about whether the state had failed them, whether the forest should be sealed, whether the truth was even knowable anymore. Jared was placed in protective custody. The authorities couldn't risk him being harmed or silenced. There were too many unanswered questions, too many powerful motivations to keep those answers buried. Months later, under the guidance of a publisher hungry for the story, he wrote a memoir. It was raw, fragmented, and disturbing. He described the routines of the commune, the cleansing rituals, the night fires, the masks, the sacrifices. He talked about specific classmates, about Tyrese, about Rachel, about Nini using only first names and careful pseudonyms for legal reasons. The book became a sensation. Some readers believed every word, citing the uncovered bus and the sketches as proof. Others dismissed it as the ravings of a traumatized man whose mind had rewritten reality to survive it. But one fact remained unshakable. Jared had seen something in those woods, something that broke him and reshaped him, something that no one else lived to describe. The forest's secrets were not all uncovered when the bus was found. They were just dragged a few inches closer to the light. The months passed, but the frenzy didn't really die down. It simply shifted. The case files grew thicker. Old leads were re-examined. New search warrants were issued. Specialized teams went back into the forest with drones, thermal cameras, and ground-penetrating radar. They found strange clearings, abandoned fire pits, rotted wooden structures that could have once been cabins. They found carved symbols on stones near a dried-up creek bed, symbols that matched some in Emily's drawings. They did not find the Chosen. Or, if they did, no one ever said. The town remained split between hope, grief, and a new, pervasive fear. Parents who had once just been sad were now afraid. Afraid that the evil Jared described was not gone. That it was waiting for new victims, new classes, new kids. Jared, meanwhile, retreated as much as he could. He became a recluse, rarely appearing in public except when required for legal proceedings or carefully managed interviews. And even in those, he seemed less like a man promoting a book and more like someone fulfilling a grim obligation. On a cool, overcast afternoon, months after the memoir's release, he returned to Forest Grove for the first time. He didn't tell anyone. No cameras followed him. No reporters shouted his name. He simply walked up the path to the high school, his jacket zipped tightly against the wind, his hands in his pockets. The building hadn't changed much. New banners, new paint, but the bones were the same. He could almost hear echoes of laughter, the slam of lockers, the faint strains of Green Day drifting from a distant boombox. He made his way inside, past the office, past the trophy cases, until he stood before the plaque. Gone, but never forgotten class of 1999, 27 names. Names he had whispered in the dark for years, afraid to say them aloud, afraid that doing so might summon something from the trees. He knelt slowly, pulling something from inside his jacket. A faded, moldy yearbook. Forest Grove High, class of 99. The cover warped, the spine cracked. It had been found on the bus and returned to the school as part of the recovered artifacts. Head asked to borrow it, to hold it one more time. He opened it carefully, flipping through pages filled with smiling faces, dumb senior quotes, and notes written in rushed handwriting. Some of the ink had bled. Some photos had faded, but the sense of who they had been before it was still there. At the back of the yearbook, where a blank page remained just inside the cover, He slid a small folded note he had written that morning. His handwriting shook, but the words were clear. "We tried to leave. Only I made it. I'm sorry." He tucked the note under the cover, where it wouldn't be seen unless someone looked closely. For now, it was a secret confession, a message not for the living, but for the lost. He stood slowly, staring at the plaque one last time. "I should have done more," he whispered under his breath, though there was no one nearby to hear him. "I should have gone back sooner. I'm sorry. I am so sorry." Then he turned and walked away, down the hall and out the door, leaving behind only the yearbook and the quiet echo of his footsteps. Some say Jared made it all up. That trauma and time twisted his memory until he believed the story he told. That cults and communes are easy scapegoats for tragedies that have more mundane explanations. Some say the truth is even darker than anything he put to paper. That there were things he refused to say, names he refused to reveal, events he refused to describe because even he couldn't bear to look at them directly. But one thing is certain. What happened to the class of '99 still haunts the trees of Oregon. Maybe the chosen disbanded. Maybe they melted back into the world, trading robes for ordinary clothes, walking unnoticed among us. Maybe the forest itself holds their echoes, the distant drumbeats on windless nights, the faint smell of smoke in the rain, the press of eyes you can't see when you're alone on a trail. Or maybe something older and nameless still waits among the roots and shadows, listening for the sound of laughter from a passing bus. So now it's your turn to decide. Do you believe Jared's story? Or do you think something even more disturbing still lies hidden in those woods, beyond the reach of search parties and cameras and the neat lines of police reports? If you've stayed with me until the end of this tale, thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe, turn on the notifications, and stay with us because the stories ahead will be even darker, stranger, and more unforgettable. With us, it will always be interesting.